Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. So welcome back on our course here on Maliki Fiqh as we read from Shaykh al-Majjājī's al-Muhadhdhab min al-Fiqh al-Mālikī wa Adillatuhu. So last time we went over some basics of purification, of tahara, and we talked about the two major types of impurification, those that are hadath and khabath, those that are removing you from a state of being pure, such as going to the bathroom, or those that prevent you, even if you have a state of purity, from performing certain ritual acts like the prayer. So if you have an impure substance on your body or on your clothing or on your place of prayer, right, that was the khabath. So now we're going to go look at water. Water, as we mentioned last time, is a purifying agent. It is mutahhir. And therefore, it is important for us to understand, well, what kinds of water can we use in our purification process for tahara? So we had mentioned that there is natural water and then there is altered water. Natural water includes water that might have a substance in it, like salt in the presence of ocean water, or clay like from a river, or like seaweed, and that can change both the taste of the water, it can change the smell of the water, it can change the color of the water, and yet if that is the natural state that that water is in, then it is considered permissible to use. And so continuing now, we're going to look at his subchapter on Bab al-Majjājī, or the chapter as it relates to waters. So he says, فَإِذَا خَلَطَهُ شَيْءٌ مِّنْ غَيْرِ مَا سَبَقَ. So if water mixes with something other than what has been previously mentioned, seawater and so on, he said, فَغَيَّرَ أَصْلَ خِلْقَتِهِ فِي لَوْنٍ أَوْ طَمَعٍ أَوْ رِيحٍ. So if we're not talking about ocean water, for instance, or things like that we mentioned before, then what we're going to deal with is water that is altered, and it has changed from its original state by something being added to it. And this can be in, again, those three major areas: fi lawn, in its color; fi tama', in its taste; aw fi rih, in the smell of it. So if this occurs, then he mentions فَقَدَ صِفَةَ الطَّهُورِيَّةِ فَصَارَ حُكْمُهُ كَحُكْمِ مُغَيِّرِهِ. So if this does happen, then we have to assess whether or not this change or this alteration of the water, is it going to result in it being permissible or impermissible to use? So he said it loses its state or its qualities of being water in a natural state, and it loses its capacity to be, as he calls, tahuriyya. It loses its purifying agency by default, though it still might have a caveat where it can be used. What we're going to do now is look at a statement from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is going to be our nas. This is going to be our textual source that we will use to indicate what the ruling is going to be, the hukm. If these words are a little strange to you, you can see my previous video that I did on Islamic terminology or glossary of Islamic terms, where we go and we discuss these things. So he said, لِقَوْلِهِ sallallahu alayhi wasallam, there is a statement from the Prophet, may Allah bless him, in which he said, إِنَّ الْمَاءَ لَا يُنَجِّسُهُ شَيْءٌ. Water is not made impure by anything, إِلَّا مَا غَلَبَ عَلَى رِيحِهِ وَطَعْمِهِ وَلَوْنِهِ, except that which changes its color, its taste, or its smell. Now, this is not the end of the story, and there's a second lesson in this for us, because we will often hear that, oh, you can't use a weak hadith for deriving a hukum, for understanding or deriving a ruling. Weak hadith have to be thrown out. So the Imam says, أخرجه ابن ماجه So one, this hadith is collected by the great Muhaddith Ibn Majah, rahimahullah, may Allah have mercy on him, according to Abi Usama al-Bahili. And he said, it's true, هذا الحديث هو ضعيف. It's true, this is a weak hadith. Now, when you say a hadith is weak, it can be weak in several different areas. It could have a weakness in its chain due to some quality or lack thereof of a narrator, or it can have weakness in its meaning. And so he says, وَهُوَ ضَعِيفٌ بِهَذَا اللَّفْظ. This particular inflection or this particular narration or wording of this hadith, it's weak. He says, وَلَكِنْ الْإِجْمَاعُ إِنْ عَقَدَ عَلَى الصِّحَّةِ مَعَنَاهُ. However, the hadith is sound, is considered to be sound, and therefore there is a consensus, an ijma'. Right? This will be another word we'll talk about as we flush out our glossary of Islamic terms. But an ijma' means that there is a consensus of scholars, a consensus of the opinions of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. So there's a consensus in aqada ala sihhati ma'anahu, that agree upon the soundness of its meaning, wa madluluhu, and it being used as a source to derive our ruling here. He says, وَفِيهِ دَلِيلٌ عَلَى بُطْلَانِ التَّفْرِيقِ بَيْنَ الْوُرُودِ الْمَاءِ عَلَى النَّجَاسَةِ. So he said that this hadith, therefore, can be used as an evidence actually against differentiating between water that has come in contact with an impurity and impurities that have come in contact with water. So he said that this is the dalil ala butlan al-tafriqi bayn al-wurud al-ma'i ala al-najasati. It's used again as a proof against when impurities come in contact with water, and fala yatanajjasu biha, nor again in the reverse. However, there is another caveat to this. What he's saying that he said إذا كان قليلا. So if the water is a small amount, then we have an issue. So the way we can understand this is that if the water is of a small amount, then if the thing which enters into it, it could potentially render the water null and void to be used in acts of tahara. But if the water is in a large amount, then this would not be the case. So he says, إذا كان قليلا لم يبلغ قلتين. So the unit of measure here, he says, if it's smaller than 2 qullas, a qulla is approximately 22 to 25 gallons of water. So he's saying that if it's less than qullatain, if it's less than 2 qullas, then the water, we have to assess, is the thing that entered into it, is it pure or is it impure? If the thing which enters into water that's less than, say, 45, 50 gallons of water, and it's impure, then that water would also be ineligible to be used for acts of purification. But as we'll see, if the thing that enters into a small amount of water, the qullatain, but in and of itself it's a pure substance, then the water is permissible to use. So he says, فَيَكُونُ طَاهِرًا. It is then considered to be pure, this water, إِذَا كَانَ الْمُغَيِّرُ طَاهِرًا. If the agent that enters into, the thing that interacts with the water, if itself is pure, then the water remains pure. He says, كَاللَّبَنِ. So imagine you have a container of water. It's less than 50 gallons of water, and some milk gets into it for some reason. Then he says, because milk is in of itself tahir, pure, then this does not invalidate the water from being used. Now, this doesn't mean you should necessarily use milk, to make wudu, but just if some got in there. So, and it's not just only about milk here. What he's saying is, it's a substance like milk. He says kal-laban. So you could say even the same, perhaps some coffee. Maybe you spilled a little bit of coffee into your water. It's a small amount, less than 50 gallons approximately. Coffee is considered to be pure because it's water and it's beans, right? This is considered to be tahir. And so if a small amount gets in, it doesn't make the water invalid. He says, وَيَكُونُ نَجِسًا. But however, if the agent or the substance that enters into the water is considered an impurity, he says, فَكَانَ الْمُغَيِّرُ نَجِسًا. Then the altered water, then it also becomes impure. He says, for example, كَالْبَوْلِ. So imagine if it were some urine. If urine were to get into even a small amount of water, which, we might consider, man, 50 gallons, that's a lot of water. But this is the measurement based upon the sources. If less than roughly 50 gallons of water were to have some urine, which is an impurity, get into it, then that water is considered najis. The water itself is considered to be impure. However, if it's larger than this, like if you're in the ocean, which is a vast amount of water, then this caveat, then this condition is lifted. And so he says, فَيُكْرَهُ التَّطَهُّرُ بِمَاءٍ اسْتُعْمِلَ فِي الطَّهَارَةِ سَابِقًا مِنْ وُضُوءٍ أَوْ غُسْلٍ. So he said another thing that is disliked, not impermissible, but disliked, makruh, is to use water that has already been used in an act of purification, such as wudu or a ghusl. وَبِيَسِيرٍ حَلَّتْ فِي نَجَاسَةٌ لَمْ تُغَيِّرُ. He said that, however, if it is a small amount of water in which some impurity has fallen into it, but it has not been altered, meaning that there is an impurity that fell into a small amount of water, but you cannot detect that it has changed the smell, it has not changed the taste, and it has not changed the color, then it's disliked, right? It's disliked to do so. He said also, بِإِضَافَةِ إِلَى ذَلِكَ, in addition to that, وَمَا وَلَغَ فِيهِ الْكَلْبِ, including like water, like a bowl of water or something that a dog has lapped from or has drank from, then it is disliked, because for the Malikis, the dog and all animals are considered tahir. All animals are considered tahir. So for the Malikiya, the touching the dog, the saliva of the dog, these are not impure for the Malikiya, and therefore, because the dog is pure, while disliked to use water that a dog has interacted with in that way, in terms of its saliva and whatnot, it is not wholly impermissible if there was like some great need, if that was the only, water available. He said, وَيُكْرَهُ الْإِقْتِصَالِ فِي الْمَاءِ الرَّاكِدِ. Likewise, it's disliked to actually make wudu or to use for purification purposes water that is stagnant. So as a generality in Islam, when we're going to use water for the purposes of purification, we like water that flows in some way, even if it's flowing out of the bottle, right? But water that's, say, like in a stagnant pond or in a puddle, this is water that is disliked, makruh, not haram. Again, if this is the only water available, then this is a different story. But it is disliked to use this kind of water. So now we can understand that water is pure in of itself, and that if it's in its natural state, if it has some perceivable characteristics in its taste, in its smell, in its color, but in its natural environment, like sediment or clay in a river or salt in seawater, then this is still considered to be ma'un tahir. This is considered to be pure water. However, water, even if it's altered, it depends on A, the altering agent, and B, the size of the water, as to whether or not it's, as we talked about, the qullatain, the two qullas, which is approximately 45 to 50 gallons of water, of which if we have an impure substance go into it, then it would render it null and void. But if it has a pure substance enter into it, then it is permissible to use.